Sophia Chen never imagined that watching her sister casually hand away their grandmother's jewelry box to a stranger at a garage sale would become the catalyst for everything that followed. She stood there, frozen in disbelief, as Veronica smiled brightly at the elderly woman walking away with what Sophia had always considered her most precious inheritance. The box contained delicate pieces that had been specifically left to her in their grandmother's will, but Veronica had somehow convinced their parents that it was just old costume jewelry taking up space in the family home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That moment, 3 years ago, had cut deeper than any argument or sibling rivalry ever could. But as Sophia would later discover, sometimes the most devastating betrayals lead to the most unexpected transformations. What started as a painful loss became the foundation for a journey that would reshape not only her relationship with her sister, but her entire understanding of family, value, and her own hidden potential. The Chen family had always revolved around Veronica. At 28, she was 2 years younger than Sophia, but had somehow assumed the role of family decision-maker through sheer force of personality and an uncanny ability to make their parents believe that her preferences were actually family consensus. Growing up in their modest row house in San Francisco's Richmond district, Sophia had watched her sister navigate family dynamics with the skill of a seasoned diplomat, always managing to position herself as the voice of reason while subtly undermining any opposition to her plans. Their grandmother, Po, had lived with them during Sophia's teenage years, and those had been some of the happiest times in the Chen household. Po had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1960s with little more than her jewelry collection and an iron determination to build a better life for her descendants. She was a tiny woman with silver hair always pulled back in a perfect bun, but her presence filled every room she entered. Unlike their parents, who were constantly worried about practical matters like mortgage payments and college tuition, Po understood the importance of beauty, craftsmanship, and preserving family heritage. Po's jewelry collection was legendary within their small family circle. She kept the pieces in an ornate lacquered box that she had brought from Taiwan, and occasionally, on special evenings, she would open it and show Sophia the various necklaces, bracelets, and earrings while telling stories about where each piece had come from. Some had been wedding gifts, others purchased during prosperous times in Taiwan, and a few were family heirlooms passed down through generations. Each piece came with a story, and Po seemed to take special pleasure in sharing these tales with Sophia, who would sit cross-legged on the bedroom floor, completely entranced. Veronica, on the other hand, had little patience for Po's stories. She would politely listen for a few minutes before finding excuses to leave, usually claiming homework or plans with friends. Their grandmother never seemed hurt by this dismissal, but Sophia noticed how Po's eyes would linger on Veronica's retreating form with a mixture of sadness and understanding. Po had grown up in a different world, one where family history and cultural preservation mattered more than fitting in with American social circles, and she seemed to recognize that Veronica was already moving beyond those old-world values. When Po passed away during Sophia's senior year of college, the reading of her will revealed that she had specifically bequeathed the jewelry collection to Sophia. The will was clear and legally binding, noting that the pieces should go to my granddaughter Sophia, who has always appreciated the stories behind beautiful things. Their parents, Linda and David Chen, had been somewhat surprised by this decision, as they had assumed Po would divide her possessions equally between the sisters. Veronica's reaction had been harder to read. She had nodded politely during the will reading and even hugged Sophia afterward, saying how nice it was that Po had chosen to give the jewelry to someone who would truly value it. At the time, Sophia had been touched by what seemed like Veronica's generous acceptance of Po's decision. The jewelry box had been carefully transported to Sophia's tiny studio apartment in the Mission District, where she was working as a graphic designer for a small nonprofit organization. The collection became her most treasured possession, not because of any monetary value she imagined it might have, but because it represented her connection to Po and to a family history that sometimes felt fragile in their increasingly Americanized household. The pieces were stunning in their diversity. There was a jade bracelet with intricate gold inlay work, several pairs of drop earrings featuring what appeared to be pearls and small gemstones, a delicate chain necklace with a pendant that looked like carved ivory, and numerous other pieces that seemed to represent different periods of Popo's life. Sophia would occasionally wear some of the simpler pieces to work or on dates, always feeling like she was carrying a piece of her grandmother's strength and elegance with her. For nearly 5 years after Popo's death, the jewelry collection remained safely in Sophia's apartment. She had survived the 2008 recession by freelancing and taking on additional projects, eventually building a small but steady client base for her design work. Life was modest, but fulfilling, and she had even started dating Marcus, a photography professor at a community college who appreciated both her artistic sensibilities and her respect for family traditions. Marcus had been fascinated by Popo's stories and would often encourage Sophia to research the history of particular pieces, suggesting that some of them might be more significant than she realized. The crisis that would change everything began with Sophia's landlord's decision to sell her building. In San Francisco's increasingly expensive rental market, finding a new apartment within her budget seemed nearly impossible. After weeks of searching, she made the difficult decision to temporarily move back into her childhood bedroom while she saved money for a security deposit and first month's rent on a new place. Her parents had been welcoming, if a bit concerned about her financial stability, and Veronica had been surprisingly supportive, even helping Sophia move her belongings into the small room that had barely changed since high school. The jewelry collection, in its lacquered box, had been placed carefully on the dresser in Sophia's old room. She had been meticulous about its placement, ensuring that it was secure and easily visible so that she would notice immediately if anything were disturbed. For the first few weeks of living at home, everything had proceeded smoothly. Sophia spent her days working on freelance projects from the dining room table, while her evenings were often spent having dinner with her parents and catching up on family news. Veronica, who worked in marketing for a tech startup and lived in a sleek apartment in Soma, would often stop by for family dinners. These visits had initially been pleasant, with Veronica sharing stories about her work and asking Sophia about her design projects with what seemed like genuine interest. Their parents clearly enjoyed having both daughters around more frequently, and there had been talk of making these family dinners a regular tradition even after Sophia found her own place. The first sign that something was wrong came when Sophia returned from a client meeting one afternoon to find her mother and Veronica in deep conversation in the kitchen. They had fallen silent when she entered, and both had looked slightly guilty, though Linda had quickly covered by offering to make tea and asking about Sophia's meeting. Veronica had left shortly afterward, claiming she had dinner plans, but not before giving Sophia an unusually long hug and saying how glad she was that they were spending more time together as a family. That evening, Sophia had noticed that the jewelry box seemed to be positioned slightly differently on her dresser, but when she opened it, everything appeared to be in place. She had convinced herself that she was being paranoid, perhaps influenced by the stress of job hunting and apartment searching. The box was old, and the wood had warped slightly over the years, so it was possible that it had shifted position naturally. Over the following weeks, however, Sophia began to notice other small signs that someone had been in her room. Her laptop, which she always positioned at a specific angle on her desk, would be facing a slightly different direction. Books on her nightstand would be in a different order. Most disturbing, the jewelry box occasionally seemed to have been moved, though its contents always appeared undisturbed when she checked. When she mentioned these observations to her parents, they seemed genuinely puzzled and slightly concerned about her state of mind. David suggested that perhaps she was more stressed about her living situation than she had realized, while Linda wondered if she might be working too hard and not getting enough sleep. Neither parent showed any signs of having been in her room, and both seemed sincerely confused by her concerns. The confrontation with Veronica came on a Saturday morning when Sophia returned early from a client meeting that had been canceled last minute. She had expected the house to be empty, as her parents had mentioned plans to spend the day visiting friends in Marin County. Instead, she found Veronica in her bedroom, carefully examining the contents of the jewelry box with a small magnifying glass. Veronica had looked up with a startled expression that quickly transformed into defensive annoyance. She had claimed that she was simply curious about the pieces and had been thinking about having some of her own jewelry appraised for insurance purposes. The magnifying glass, she explained, was something she had borrowed from their father's desk to get a better look at the craftsmanship. Her explanation had been delivered with the same confident tone she had used since childhood to talk her way out of trouble, but Sophia could see through the performance. The argument that followed had been brutal in its honesty. Sophia had demanded to know how long Veronica had been sneaking into her room and examining the jewelry collection. Veronica had initially tried to maintain her story about casual curiosity, but when pressed, she had finally admitted that she had been researching the pieces online and had begun to suspect that some of them might be more valuable than anyone had realized. Popo's stories had often included mentions of expensive purchases and family heirlooms, Veronica had argued, and it seemed irresponsible not to properly assess what they had inherited. She had suggested that the collection should be professionally appraised and possibly sold, with the proceeds divided between the sisters regardless of what Popo's will had specified. After all, she had reasoned, Popo could not have known the current market value of the pieces when she had made her decision about inheritance. Sophia had been stunned by the suggestion that they should ignore Popo's explicit wishes, but even more disturbed by the realization that Veronica had been secretly investigating the collection for weeks without mentioning her suspicions. The conversation had ended with Veronica storming out of the house, muttering about Sophia's selfishness and refusal to consider what was best for the family. For several days after the confrontation, an uncomfortable tension had hung over the Chen household. Their parents seemed to sense that something was wrong between the sisters, but neither Sophia nor Veronica had been willing to explain the situation in detail. Sophia had considered telling her parents about Veronica's behavior, but had ultimately decided that it would only create more family drama without resolving the underlying issue. The garage sale had been organized by their parents as part of a long-overdue effort to declutter the house. Linda had been talking for months about the need to go through accumulated possessions and donate or sell things that were no longer needed. She had finally scheduled a weekend for the project, and both sisters had been enlisted to help sort through old belongings and determine what should be kept, donated, or sold. Sophia had spent Friday evening carefully moving the jewelry box from her bedroom to the closet in her parents' room, explaining to her mother that she wanted to ensure it would be safe during the chaos of the garage sale preparation. Linda had seemed to understand the precaution and had assured Sophia that the box would remain undisturbed in the master bedroom. Saturday morning had begun with the usual garage sale preparations. Tables had been set up in the driveway and garage, and various family possessions had been arranged for potential buyers to examine. Sophia had been managing a table of old books and household items, while Veronica had been stationed near a collection of furniture and larger objects. Their parents had been circulating among the customers, answering questions and handling transactions. The morning had proceeded smoothly, with steady traffic from neighbors and bargain hunters. Sophia had been enjoying the opportunity to interact with people from the neighborhood and had even sold several items from her table to customers who seemed genuinely excited about their purchases. The atmosphere had been friendly and relaxed, with none of the tension that had characterized family interactions since the bedroom confrontation. It was around noon when Sophia had noticed an elderly woman examining items on Veronica's table with unusual interest. The woman had been well-dressed and carried herself with the air of someone who knew quality when she saw it. She had been asking Veronica detailed questions, and Sophia had observed that her sister seemed to be enjoying the conversation and the woman's obvious appreciation for fine craftsmanship. The moment that would haunt Sophia for months afterward had happened when she was helping another customer and could only watch from a distance. She had seen Veronica disappear into the house briefly before returning with a familiar lacquered box. Even from across the garage, Sophia had immediately recognized Popo's jewelry box, and her heart had begun racing as she watched Veronica open it for the elegant customer to examine. By the time Sophia had been able to extricate herself from her own customer interaction, the transaction had been completed. The elderly woman had been walking toward her car, carefully carrying the jewelry box, while Veronica had been folding several $20 bills into her pocket. Sophia had run after the woman, calling out desperately, but the customer had already placed the box in her car and driven away before Sophia could reach her. The confrontation with Veronica had been immediate and explosive. Sophia had demanded to know how her sister could have possibly thought it was acceptable to sell Popo's jewelry collection without permission. Veronica had initially tried to claim that she had misunderstood which items were meant for the garage sale, but when Sophia had pointed out that the box had been safely stored in their parents' bedroom, Veronica's story had quickly fallen apart. Eventually, Veronica had admitted that she had retrieved the box specifically to sell it. She had argued that the pieces were just sitting unused in storage and that the money from the sale could be put to better use by the family. The customer had paid $60 for the entire collection, which Veronica had claimed was a fair price for what appeared to be costume jewelry. She had promised to split the money with Sophia, as if that gesture could somehow make the betrayal acceptable. Sophia had been too shocked and hurt to continue the argument in front of garage sale customers and neighbors. She had spent the rest of the day in a state of numb disbelief, mechanically helping with the sale while trying to process what had just happened. Her parents had eventually noticed her distress, but when they had asked what was wrong, she had been unable to find words to explain the situation without breaking down completely. That evening, after the garage sale equipment had been stored away and the unsold items donated to charity, Sophia had finally told her parents what had occurred. Their reaction had been one of horror and confusion. Linda had immediately called Veronica, demanding an explanation, while David had begun making plans to track down the customer who had purchased the jewelry box. Veronica's response to their parents' inquiries had been a masterclass in manipulation and damage control. She had admitted to selling the jewelry, but had framed the decision as a well-intentioned attempt to help Sophia become less attached to material possessions that were preventing her from moving forward with her life. She had suggested that Sophia's obsession with Popo's belongings was unhealthy and that holding on to the past was keeping her from achieving independence and success. Furthermore, Veronica had argued that the jewelry had no significant monetary value and that Sophia's emotional attachment to the pieces was disproportionate to their actual worth. She had promised to help locate the customer and attempt to repurchase the collection if it would help restore family harmony, but she had maintained that the sale itself had been motivated by genuine concern for Sophia's well-being. The search for the jewelry box had consumed the following weeks. David had posted notices in the neighborhood asking anyone who had information about the elderly woman who had purchased the collection to contact the Chen family. Linda had called local antique shops and estate sale companies, hoping that the customer might be a dealer who could be tracked down through professional networks. Sophia had spent hours walking through nearby neighborhoods, hoping to spot the woman's car or find some other clue to her identity. Despite their efforts, the jewelry box and its contents had vanished completely. The elderly woman had paid in cash and had not provided any contact information. None of the neighbors who had attended the garage sale could remember seeing her before or knew anything about her background. It was as if Popo's precious collection had simply evaporated into the vast anonymity of San Francisco's diverse population. The family dynamics that emerged in the aftermath of the jewelry sale had been complex and painful. Linda and David had been clearly upset with Veronica's actions, but they had also seemed reluctant to take decisive action that might permanently damage their relationship with their younger daughter. They had encouraged Sophia to consider forgiving Veronica and moving on from the incident, arguing that family relationships were more important than material possessions, however sentimental. Veronica herself had maintained a stance of injured innocence, insisting that her motives had been pure and that everyone was overreacting to what had been essentially a miscommunication. She had made several offers to compensate Sophia financially for the lost jewelry, suggesting amounts that increased over time as it became clear that her sister's anger was not diminishing. These offers had only deepened Sophia's hurt, as they demonstrated that Veronica still fundamentally misunderstood the nature of what had been lost. For Sophia, the betrayal had cut far deeper than the loss of the physical objects, devastating as that had been. The jewelry collection had represented her connection to Popo and to a family history that felt increasingly fragile in their modern American context. But beyond that, the incident had revealed something disturbing about her sister's character and about the family dynamics that had allowed such a betrayal to occur and then minimized. The realization that Veronica had been capable of deliberately violating Popo's explicit wishes, stealing into Sophia's private space, and then selling irreplaceable family heirlooms had forced Sophia to reconsider everything she thought she knew about their relationship. The sister she had grown up with, fought with, but ultimately trusted, had revealed herself to be someone willing to cause profound hurt for relatively trivial financial gain. Even more painful had been their parents' response to the situation.
While Linda and David had clearly disapproved of Veronica's actions, their primary concern had seemed to be restoring family harmony rather than addressing the fundamental violation of trust that had occurred. Their suggestions that Sophia should accept monetary compensation and move on had felt like a dismissal of both Popo's wishes and Sophia's legitimate grief over the loss. The weeks following the garage sale had been some of the most isolating of Sophia's life. She had continued living in her childhood bedroom while searching for an apartment, but the house had no longer felt like a safe space. Every family dinner had been strained with unspoken tension, and every interaction with Veronica had been anger and betrayal. Her parents had made increasingly desperate attempts to mediate between the sisters, but their efforts had only highlighted how differently each family member viewed the situation.
Marcus had been a steady source of support during this period, listening to Sophia's anger and grief without trying to minimize her feelings or push her toward premature forgiveness. He had been particularly outraged by the loss of Popo's stories along with the physical pieces, understanding that the jewelry collection had been a tangible link to family history that could never be replaced. His validation of her feelings had been crucial during a time when her own family seemed to be suggesting that her reaction was excessive. It had been Marcus who had first suggested that Sophia might consider learning more about jewelry appraisal and authentication. He had pointed out that her artistic background and attention to detail would serve her well in such a field, and that developing expertise in Asian antiques and jewelry might be a way to honor Popo's memory while building a career that aligned with her interests. The suggestion had initially seemed like an impossible leap from graphic design to a completely different profession. But as Sophia had begun researching the field, she had discovered a world that felt both fascinating and personally meaningful. The decision to enroll in a jewelry appraisal certification program had not been made lightly. The course required a significant financial investment that would delay her plans to move out of her parents' house, and it meant putting her graphic design career on hold for several months while she pursued intensive training. However, the more Sophia had learned about the program, the more convinced she had become that this was the right direction for her life. The Gemological Institute of America offered a comprehensive program in jewelry appraisal that covered everything from gemstone identification to market valuation to historical authentication. The coursework was demanding, requiring students to develop expertise in chemistry, geology, art history, and business practices. Sophia had thrown herself into the studies with an intensity that surprised even Marcus, spending long hours memorizing gemstone properties and practicing identification techniques. The other students in the program had come from diverse backgrounds, but many shared Sophia's combination of artistic sensibility and analytical thinking. There had been former art history professors, retired jewelers, and young professionals looking to change careers. The community that developed among the students had been supportive and collaborative, with everyone sharing knowledge and resources as they worked towards certification. During the months of intensive study, Sophia had found herself thinking often about Popo and the stories that had accompanied each piece in the lost collection. The technical knowledge she was acquiring had given new context to those childhood memories, helping her understand the historical and cultural significance of the craftsmanship Popo had described. She had begun to realize that her grandmother's collection might indeed have been far more valuable than anyone in the family had understood. The revelation had been both thrilling and heartbreaking. If Popo's pieces had been authentic examples of traditional Taiwanese jewelry from the mid-20th century, as Sophia was beginning to suspect they might have been, then the collection could have been worth tens of thousands of dollars, rather than the $60 Veronica had accepted at the garage sale. More importantly, the pieces might have represented significant examples of traditional craftsmanship that were becoming increasingly rare as older generations passed away and traditional techniques were lost. As Sophia's knowledge had grown, she had become increasingly convinced that Popo had been far more sophisticated about jewelry than anyone in the family had realized. The stories about expensive purchases and family heirlooms had probably been accurate, and Popo's decision to leave the collection specifically to Sophia had likely been based on a recognition that her older granddaughter would value and preserve the pieces appropriately. The completion of her certification program had marked a turning point in Sophia's life.
She had not only gained professional credentials in jewelry appraisal, but had also discovered a passion that felt deeply connected to her family heritage and personal values. The technical skills she had developed were complemented by an intuitive understanding of craftsmanship and cultural significance that her instructors had noted and encouraged. Her first job in the field had been with an established appraisal firm in downtown San Francisco that specialized in estate jewelry and Asian antiques. The position had required her to work closely with families who were dealing with inheritance issues, insurance claims, and estate sales, experiences that had given her deep empathy for the emotional complexity of valuing family possessions. She had quickly developed a reputation for sensitivity and thoroughness, particularly when working with clients who had inherited jewelry from immigrant grandparents or other relatives with complex cultural backgrounds. The work had been both intellectually challenging and emotionally rewarding. Each piece that came across her desk had its own story, and Sophia had found great satisfaction in helping families understand the history and value of their inherited possessions. She had appraised everything from Victorian mourning jewelry to contemporary designer pieces, but her specialty had quickly become Asian jewelry and decorative arts from the mid-20th century. Marcus had been incredibly supportive of her career transition, adjusting his own schedule to accommodate her unpredictable work hours and celebrating each professional milestone with genuine enthusiasm. Their relationship had deepened during this period, with both of them recognizing that Sophia's newfound passion had brought out qualities in her that had been suppressed during her years of struggling with family dynamics and career uncertainty. The move out of her parents' house had finally happened about a year after completing her certification. Sophia had found a small apartment in the Castro district that was within her budget and close to public transportation. The space was modest but felt like a sanctuary after the tension of living at home during the aftermath of the jewelry incident. Marcus had helped with the move, and they had celebrated her independence with a quiet dinner at a neighborhood restaurant that would become one of their regular spots. The relationship with her family during this period had remained strained but had gradually begun to heal in small ways. Linda and David had been proud of Sophia's professional achievements and had made efforts to understand her new career path. They had asked thoughtful questions about her work and had even referred a neighbor who needed jewelry appraised for insurance purposes. These gestures had meant a great deal to Sophia, representing a level of support and validation that had been missing during her years as a struggling graphic designer. Veronica, however, had remained largely absent from Sophia's life during this period of growth and change. The sisters had maintained basic politeness during family gatherings, but they had not had any meaningful conversations about the jewelry incident or their relationship more generally. Veronica had made a few comments about being glad that Sophia had found direction in her life, but there had been no acknowledgement of the pain her actions had caused or any genuine attempt at reconciliation. The distance between the sisters had been noticed by their parents, who had made occasional suggestions about family therapy or mediated conversations, but Sophia was not ready for such interventions. The betrayal had cut too deeply, and the lack of genuine accountability from Veronica had made it impossible for Sophia to consider forgiveness or reconciliation. She had needed time and space to rebuild her sense of self and establish her own identity separate from the family dynamics that had allowed the betrayal to occur.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. During her second year working as a professional appraiser, Sophia had begun to develop a side business providing authentication services for online auction houses and private collectors. The work had been lucrative and had allowed her to build a network of contacts throughout the antique and collectible jewelry world. She had also started writing articles for trade publications about identifying authentic Asian jewelry and avoiding common forgeries, work that had established her as an emerging expert in her field. The writing had led to speaking opportunities at industry conferences and collector society meetings. Sophia had discovered that she enjoyed teaching others about jewelry authentication and had a gift for making complex technical information accessible to non-specialists. Her presentations about the cultural and historical context of Asian jewelry had been particularly well received, with audience members often approaching her afterward to share their own family stories about inherited pieces. It had been at one of these conferences that Sophia had met Dr. Elizabeth Wong, a curator of Asian art at a major museum who had become both a mentor and a friend. Dr. Wang had been impressed by Sophia's combination of technical expertise and cultural sensitivity, and she had invited Sophia to collaborate on a research project about Taiwanese jewelry traditions in the mid-20th century. The research had been fascinating and personally meaningful for Sophia. Working with Dr. Wang, she had gained access to museum collections and academic resources that had allowed her to develop a much deeper understanding of the types of pieces that Popo's collection had likely contained. The project had also connected her with other scholars and collectors who were working to preserve knowledge about traditional Asian jewelry techniques and cultural practices. As her expertise and reputation had grown, Sophia had begun to consider starting her own appraisal business rather than continuing to work for someone else's firm. The idea had been both exciting and terrifying, requiring her to develop business skills that went far beyond her technical knowledge of jewelry. However, Marcus had been enthusiastic about the possibility, and Dr. Wang had offered to serve as a reference and advisor if Sophia decided to pursue independent practice. The decision to launch her own business had finally been made during her third year as a professional appraiser. She had accumulated enough savings to cover startup costs and had built a client base that would provide immediate income. More importantly, she had developed the confidence and expertise necessary to succeed as an independent practitioner. The business had been incorporated as Chen Authentication Services, a name that honored her family heritage while establishing her professional identity. The first year of independent practice had been challenging but ultimately successful. Sophia had rented a small office space in the financial district and had invested in professional equipment and insurance. Her client base had grown through referrals and her reputation for expertise in Asian jewelry, and she had been able to maintain financial stability while building the business. Marcus had been incredibly supportive throughout the process, helping with everything from website design to bookkeeping. By the end of her first year in business, Sophia had appraised jewelry collections worth millions of dollars and had helped numerous families understand the value and significance of their inherited pieces. She had also begun offering educational services, teaching workshops for collectors and dealers about authentic Asian jewelry identification. The combination of appraisal work and education had proved to be both financially viable and personally fulfilling. The success of her business had not gone unnoticed by her family. Linda and David had been proud of their daughter's entrepreneurial achievement and had made efforts to support the business by referring potential clients. They had also begun to understand the professional expertise that Sophia had developed and had started asking her opinion about jewelry and antiques they encountered in their own lives. The changes in her relationship with her parents had been gradual but significant. They had begun to see her as a successful professional rather than their struggling younger daughter, and this shift in perception had improved the family dynamic considerably. Sophia had felt more respected and valued during family interactions, and she had been able to contribute to family conversations from a position of expertise and confidence rather than defensive uncertainty. However, the relationship with Veronica had remained frozen in the aftermath of the jewelry incident. The sisters had maintained basic civility during family gatherings, but there had been no meaningful communication or acknowledgement of the unresolved issues between them. Sophia had focused on building her business and personal life, while Veronica had continued her career in tech marketing, apparently unbothered by the ongoing estrangement from her sister. The situation that would eventually force a confrontation between the sisters had begun to develop during Sophia's second year of independent practice. She had been contacted by an estate attorney representing the family of an elderly woman who had recently passed away in Marin County. The woman's heirs needed a comprehensive appraisal of her jewelry collection for tax and distribution purposes, and the attorney had been referred to Sophia by another client who had been impressed with her work. The initial meeting with the family had taken place at the deceased woman's home, a beautifully maintained Victorian house overlooking San Francisco Bay. The woman's daughter, Margaret, had explained that her mother had been an avid collector of Asian art and jewelry, accumulating pieces over several decades of travel and careful purchasing. The collection was extensive and appeared to include pieces from various Asian cultures and time periods. As Sophia had begun examining the collection, she had immediately recognized several pieces that were exceptional examples of their type. There had been jade jewelry from various periods, traditional Chinese gold work, and what appeared to be some very fine examples of mid-20th century Taiwanese craftsmanship. The quality and authenticity of the pieces had been immediately apparent to her trained eye, and she had realized that this was likely to be one of the most significant collections she had been asked to appraise.
The work had required several visits to the house, as the collection was too extensive to evaluate in a single session.
During these visits, Sophia had gotten to know Margaret and had heard stories about her mother's passion for Asian culture and her careful approach to collecting. The deceased woman had apparently been very knowledgeable about the pieces she acquired and had kept detailed records of purchases and provenance. It had been during her third visit to the house that Sophia had made a discovery that had stopped her heart. Hidden in a back corner of the jewelry collection, in a small wooden box that had initially appeared to contain costume jewelry, she had found pieces that looked remarkably familiar. As she had examined them more closely, her suspicions had been confirmed. These were pieces from Popo's collection, items that she remembered from childhood stories and had thought were lost forever. The jade bracelet with gold inlay was unmistakable, as was a pair of drop earrings that Popo had often worn to family celebrations. There had been several other pieces that Sophia recognized with absolute certainty, along with a few items that might have been from the collection, but that she could not identify with complete confidence. The condition of the pieces was excellent, suggesting that they had been carefully maintained by their purchaser. The emotional impact of the discovery had been overwhelming. Sophia had excused herself to the bathroom, where she had cried silently while trying to process the implications of what she had found. The pieces that had meant so much to her and represented such an important connection to Popo had not been lost after all. They had been purchased by someone who had recognized their quality and had preserved them appropriately. However, the ethical implications of the situation had been immediately apparent to Sophia. She was being paid to appraise the collection for the current owner's family, and she had a professional obligation to provide accurate valuations regardless of her personal connection to specific pieces. At the same time, the jewelry legally belonged to her, having been stolen and sold without her permission. The conflict between her professional responsibilities and her personal rights had created an impossible situation. After completing her examination of the pieces and making detailed notes about their condition and characteristics, Sophia had returned to Margaret to discuss the preliminary findings. She had provided information about the overall collection while carefully considering how to address the specific pieces that belonged to her. The ethical complexity of the situation had required her to seek guidance from her professional organization and legal counsel. The consultation with an attorney had confirmed that Sophia's legal position was strong. The pieces had been stolen from her and sold without authorization, making their subsequent purchase invalid regardless of whether the buyer had acted in good faith. However, pursuing legal action would likely be expensive and time-consuming, and it might damage her professional reputation if the situation became public knowledge. The attorney had suggested that the best approach might be to contact Margaret directly and explain the situation honestly, providing documentation of the original inheritance and the circumstances of the theft. This approach would allow the family to make an informed decision about how to proceed and might result in a resolution that protected both Sophia's legal rights and her professional relationships. The conversation with Margaret had been one of the most difficult professional discussions of Sophia's career. She had carefully explained the history of the pieces, providing copies of Popo's will and documentation of the garage sale incident. Margaret had been initially skeptical, but as Sophia had provided more details about the specific pieces and their provenance, it had become clear that the story was credible. Margaret had been mortified to learn that her mother had unknowingly purchased stolen property, even though the transaction had been conducted in apparent good faith. The elderly woman had apparently bought the pieces at the garage sale, not knowing their true ownership status, and had added them to her collection, believing them to be legitimately available for purchase. Margaret had immediately expressed willingness to return the pieces to their rightful owner. However, the family had also been concerned about the financial implications of the return. The pieces had been part of the estate valuation, and their removal would affect the distribution of assets among the heirs. Margaret had asked whether there might be some way to compensate the estate for the value of the pieces, allowing Sophia to reclaim her property while ensuring that the family did not suffer financially from their mother's innocent mistake. The suggestion had put Sophia in an unexpected position. Her jewelry appraisal business had been successful enough that she could afford to purchase the pieces at their appraised value, effectively buying back her own stolen property.
The irony of the situation had not been lost on her, but she had recognized that this approach would resolve the situation fairly for all parties involved. The formal appraisal of Popo's pieces had revealed their true value for the first time. Using her professional expertise and current market data, Sophia had determined that the collection was worth approximately $48,000. The pieces represented exceptional examples of mid-20th century Taiwanese jewelry craftsmanship, and several items appeared to be the work of master artisans whose techniques were no longer practiced. The jade bracelet alone had been valued at $12,000, reflecting both the quality of the jade and the intricacy of the gold inlay work. The drop earrings had been worth $8,000, and the other pieces had ranged from $1,500 to $5,000 each. The total value had been nearly 800 times what Veronica had accepted at the garage sale 3 years earlier. The financial arrangement with Margaret's family had been completed through their attorney, with Sophia purchasing the pieces at their appraised value. The transaction was structured as a business purchase rather than a personal restitution, protecting both parties legally and ensuring that the estate received fair compensation for the unexpected loss of assets. Bringing Popo's jewelry collection home had been one of the most emotional experiences of Sophia's adult life. She had carefully transported each piece to her apartment, where she had created a secure storage system that would protect them while allowing her to access and enjoy them. The jade bracelet had been the first piece she had worn after their return, and she had spent the evening looking through old photographs of Popo while holding the other pieces and remembering the stories that had accompanied each one.
Marcus had been present for the homecoming of the jewelry collection, and he had understood the profound significance of the moment for Sophia. He had helped her research secure storage options and had celebrated with her as she had tried on various pieces and shared Popo's stories about their origins and meaning. His support and enthusiasm had meant everything to Sophia during this emotionally complex time. The financial cost of reclaiming her inheritance had been substantial but manageable given the success of her business. Sophia had viewed the expense as an investment in her family heritage and emotional well-being rather than a financial burden. The money had come from business profits that had been built through her expertise in exactly the type of jewelry she was reclaiming, creating a satisfying circular logic to the transaction. However, the most challenging aspect of the situation had yet to be addressed. Sophia had reclaimed Popo's jewelry collection, but she had not yet confronted Veronica about the true value of what had been stolen and sold. The knowledge that her sister had given away a $48,000 inheritance for $60 had been burning inside Sophia, but she had not been sure how or when to address the situation. The decision about whether to tell her family about the recovery of the jewelry collection had been complex. On one hand, she had wanted to share the good news and the validation that Popo's collection had indeed been as special as she had always believed. On the other hand, revealing the true value of what Veronica had sold would inevitably create new family conflict and force a reckoning that might be more destructive than healing. Marcus had encouraged her to share the news with her parents, arguing that they deserved to know that the family heirloom had been recovered and that their support during the aftermath of the theft had been meaningful to her. However, he had also understood her reluctance to immediately confront Veronica with evidence of the magnitude of her betrayal. The compromise that Sophia had eventually reached was to tell her parents about the recovery of the jewelry while asking them to keep the information confidential until she decided how to handle the situation with Veronica. Linda and David had been overjoyed to learn that Popo's collection had been found and returned, and they had been appropriately shocked by the revelation of its true value. Their reaction to learning that Veronica had unknowingly given away a $48,000 inheritance had been a mixture of horror, anger, and disbelief. Linda had immediately wanted to call Veronica and demand that she take responsibility for the financial loss, while David had been more concerned about the legal and ethical implications of the original sale. Both parents had struggled to understand how their younger daughter could have made such a devastating mistake through carelessness and overconfidence. Sophia had asked her parents to allow her to handle the situation with Veronica in her own way and timing. She had needed time to process the recovery of the collection and to decide what kind of resolution she wanted to pursue. The priority had been reclaiming the pieces themselves, and now that this had been accomplished, she had needed to consider what justice or accountability might look like.
The months following the recovery of Popo's jewelry had been a period of reflection and growth for Sophia. Her business had continued to thrive, and she had gained recognition as one of the leading experts on Asian jewelry authentication on the West Coast. The experience of researching and reclaiming her family's collection had deepened her understanding of her professional field and had provided material for several well-received articles and presentations. More importantly, the return of the jewelry had provided a sense of closure and connection to Popo that had been missing since the original theft. Sophia had begun wearing pieces from the collection regularly, feeling like she was carrying her grandmother's strength and wisdom with her as she navigated her professional and personal life. The stories that accompanied each piece had taken on new meaning now that she understood their historical and artistic significance. The relationship with Marcus had deepened during this period, with both of them recognizing that they wanted to build a future together. They had begun discussing marriage and had started looking at apartments that would accommodate both of their professional needs and their shared interest in art and culture. The stability and support that Marcus provided was crucial as Sophia had worked through the complex emotions surrounding her family situation. However, the unresolved issues with Veronica had continued to weigh on Sophia's mind. The knowledge that her sister remains unaware of the true consequences of her actions felt like unfinished business that prevented complete healing and closure. Sophia had known that eventually she would need to decide whether to confront Veronica with the truth or to simply move forward without addressing the past. The decision had been made for her when Veronica had called unexpectedly on a Saturday evening, 3 months after the jewelry collection had been recovered. The conversation had started with typical small talk about work and family, but Veronica had quickly revealed the real purpose of her call. She had been researching Asian jewelry online and had begun to suspect that Popo's collection might have been more valuable than anyone had realized at the time of the garage sale. Veronica had explained that she had been feeling guilty about the jewelry incident and had wanted to make things right with Sophia. She had proposed tracking down the pieces and purchasing them back, regardless of their current value, as a way of demonstrating her genuine remorse and commitment to repairing their relationship. The offer had been delivered with the same confident tone that Veronica had always used when trying to manage family situations to her advantage. The irony of Veronica's proposal had been almost too perfect to believe. After 3 years of refusing to acknowledge the significance of her betrayal, her sister was now offering to buy back the very pieces that Sophia had already reclaimed at enormous personal expense. The offer had revealed that Veronica still fundamentally misunderstood the situation, believing that the problem could be resolved through financial compensation rather than genuine accountability. Sophia's response had been carefully measured. She had thanked Veronica for her offer, but had explained that it would no longer be necessary. When Veronica had pressed for details, Sophia had calmly revealed that she had already located and reclaimed Popo's jewelry collection through her professional work. The silence on the other end of the phone had stretched for several long seconds as Veronica had processed this information. The conversation that followed had been unlike any interaction the sisters had ever had. For the first time, Sophia had spoken from a position of complete strength and knowledge, while Veronica had been forced to confront the reality of her actions and their consequences. Sophia had provided details about the recovery process, the professional appraisal, and the true value of what had been sold for $60 at the garage sale. The revelation that the jewelry collection had been worth $48,000 had clearly shocked Veronica into silence. When she had finally responded, her voice had been barely above a whisper as she had asked whether Sophia was certain about the valuation. Sophia had confirmed the figures and had explained the professional standards and market research that had supported her appraisal. Veronica's immediate reaction had been to offer financial compensation for the difference between what she had received at the garage sale and the true value of the pieces. She had suggested that she could pay Sophia the $47,940 that represented the shortfall, plus interest and compensation for the emotional distress that had been caused. The offer had been delivered desperately, as if money could somehow undo the betrayal and restore their relationship. Sophia had declined the financial offer, explaining that she had already paid to reclaim the pieces and that money was not the real issue that needed to be addressed.
The conversation had continued for over an hour, with Veronica alternately apologizing, making excuses, and trying to negotiate some form of resolution that would relieve her guilt without requiring her to fully confront the magnitude of what she had done. The phone call had ended without resolution, but it had marked the beginning of a new phase in the sisters' relationship. For the first time since the garage sale, they were communicating directly about what had happened, and Veronica was being forced to acknowledge the true consequences of her actions. However, her focus remained primarily on finding a way to make the situation go away, rather than on understanding the deeper issues of trust and respect that had been damaged. Over the following weeks, Veronica had made several more attempts to contact Sophia and negotiate some form of resolution. She had offered various forms of compensation, from direct financial payments to funding Sophia's business expansion to paying for family therapy sessions. Each offer had revealed her continued belief that the problem was fundamentally financial rather than relational. Sophia had realized that her sister's approach to the situation was consistent with the same mindset that had led to the original betrayal. Veronica saw the jewelry collection primarily in terms of monetary value rather than emotional significance, and she believed that relationships could be managed and repaired through strategic gestures rather than genuine understanding and accountability. The contrast between Veronica's current desperation to make amends and her previous years of indifference and dismissal had been stark and revealing. The change in her behavior had clearly been motivated by her belated recognition of the financial significance of what she had done, rather than by genuine empathy for the pain she had caused. This realization had been both disappointing and clarifying for Sophia. The situation had reached a crisis point when Veronica had shown up unannounced at Sophia's apartment on a Tuesday evening, carrying a cashier's check for $50,000. She had been visibly agitated and had immediately launched into a prepared speech about taking responsibility for her mistakes and wanting to make things right between them. The check had been presented as proof of her sincerity and commitment to repairing their relationship. Sophia had invited her sister inside, but she had refused to accept the check or to engage with Veronica's framework for resolving the situation. Instead, she had explained that the real issue was not financial compensation, but the fundamental violation of trust and respect that had occurred. She had pointed out that Veronica's current behavior, while better than her previous indifference, still demonstrated a failure to understand what had actually been damaged. The conversation had been intense and emotional, with both sisters finally expressing years of accumulated frustration and hurt. Veronica had defended her original actions by claiming that she had genuinely believed the jewelry was worthless and that she had been trying to help Sophia move on from what seemed like an unhealthy attachment to the past. She had argued that her mistake had been one of judgment rather than malice. Sophia had responded by explaining that the intent behind Veronica's actions was less important than their impact and the pattern of disrespect they had revealed. She had pointed out that Veronica had never asked for permission before taking the jewelry, had never consulted with Sophia about whether she wanted help moving on, and had never acknowledged the violation of Popo's explicit wishes about the inheritance. Furthermore, Sophia had argued that Veronica's current desperation to resolve the situation was motivated by her own guilt and discomfort, rather than by genuine concern for Sophia's feelings. The timing of her sister's remorse, coming only after she had realized the financial magnitude of her mistake, had revealed that her regret was primarily about the consequences to herself rather than the harm she had caused. The confrontation had lasted for several hours, with both sisters expressing feelings and perspectives that had been suppressed for years. For Sophia, it had been liberating to finally articulate the full scope of the betrayal and its impact on her life. For Veronica, it had apparently been a shocking introduction to her sister's perspective on their relationship and family dynamics. By the end of the evening, both sisters had been emotionally exhausted, but they had also achieved a level of honesty in their communication that had never existed before. Veronica had finally begun to understand that her actions had been about more than just a financial mistake, and Sophia had been able to express the depth of her hurt without being dismissed or minimized. However, the conversation had not resulted in immediate reconciliation or forgiveness. Sophia had explained that rebuilding trust would require time and consistent demonstration of changed behavior rather than grand gestures or financial compensation.
She had suggested that Veronica needed to examine her own patterns of behavior and consider why she had been able to justify such a significant violation of her sister's rights and wishes. The months following this confrontation were a period of cautious re-engagement between the sisters. Veronica had begun making efforts to understand Sophia's perspective and to acknowledge the ways in which their family dynamics had contributed to the situation. She had started therapy to work on her own issues with boundaries and respect, and she had begun approaching their relationship with more humility and genuine curiosity about Sophia's experiences. For her part, Sophia had remained open to the possibility of rebuilding their relationship while maintaining clear boundaries about what would be required for genuine reconciliation. She had continued to wear Popo's jewelry regularly, finding that the pieces served as both a connection to her heritage and a reminder of her own strength and resilience in overcoming betrayal and reclaiming what belonged to her. The recovery of Popo's jewelry collection represented more than just the return of valuable family heirlooms.
It had symbolized Sophia's transformation from someone who had been victimized by family dynamics into someone who had built the expertise and resources necessary to protect and reclaim what mattered to her. The professional success that had made the recovery possible had been built on the foundation of skills and interests that had been nurtured by Popo's stories and guidance. As Sophia looked back on the journey from the devastating garage sale to the current moment, she recognized that the experience had ultimately strengthened her in ways that would have been impossible to imagine at the time of the original betrayal. The pain had been real and significant, but it had also catalyzed a period of growth and self-discovery that had led to professional success, personal fulfillment, and a deeper understanding of her own values and priorities. The relationship with her family had been fundamentally changed by the experience, but in many ways it had become more honest and authentic than it had ever been before. The crisis had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about their dynamics and assumptions, and while the process had been painful, it had also created opportunities for genuine connection and understanding that had not existed before. Looking forward, Sophia felt optimistic about the possibility of continued healing and growth in her relationships with her family members. The recovery of Popo's jewelry had provided a sense of completion and justice that allowed her to approach these relationships from a position of strength rather than victimhood. The pieces themselves continue to serve as tangible reminders of her heritage, her resilience, and her ability to create positive change in her own life regardless of the actions or attitudes of others. The transformation from a woman whose sister had given away her most precious inheritance to someone who had built the expertise and resources to reclaim and protect that inheritance represented a journey of empowerment that extended far beyond the specific circumstances of the jewelry collection. It was a story of discovering hidden strengths, building professional expertise, and learning to value herself enough to demand the respect and recognition she deserved from others. As she prepared for whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead, Sophia carried with her not only Popo's jewelry and stories, but also the knowledge that she had the strength and capability to overcome betrayal, build something meaningful from loss, and create the kind of life and relationships that honored both her heritage and her own authentic self. The sister who had given away her gift had inadvertently given her something far more valuable: the motivation and opportunity to discover her own power and create her own success. The morning after Veronica's unexpected visit with the cashier's check, Sophia found herself staring at the rejected payment that her sister had left behind on the coffee table. $50,000, neatly printed on bank paper, represented more money than Sophia had ever seen in one place, yet it felt worthless compared to what she had already reclaimed through her own efforts. The check seemed to mock the very foundation of Veronica's understanding of their conflict, reducing years of pain and professional growth to a simple financial transaction. Marcus had arrived early that morning to find Sophia sitting quietly with her morning tea, still processing the intensity of the previous evening's confrontation. He had listened carefully as she recounted the conversation, noting how her sister's approach had revealed the same fundamental misunderstanding that had led to the original betrayal. Veronica still believed that problems could be solved through strategic gestures rather than genuine change, and she remained focused on managing the situation rather than truly comprehending its deeper implications. The weeks following Veronica's dramatic gesture had been marked by an uncomfortable silence from her family. Neither of her parents had called, which suggested that Veronica had grieved them about the failed reconciliation attempt without providing complete context about why her offer had been rejected. Sophia found herself wondering whether her sister had portrayed her as unreasonable or greedy, unwilling to accept generous compensation for past wrongs. During this period, Sophia's business had continued to flourish in ways that exceeded her most optimistic projections. Word of her expertise in Asian jewelry authentication had spread throughout the collector community, leading to consulting opportunities with auction houses, insurance companies, and private collectors across the country. She had been invited to serve as an expert witness in several legal cases involving disputed ownership of valuable pieces, work that was both intellectually challenging and financially rewarding. The irony was not lost on her that the skills she had developed, partly in response to losing Popo's collection, had made her one of the most sought-after authorities on exactly the type of pieces that had been stolen from her. Every authentication project reinforced her understanding of craftsmanship, cultural significance, and market value, deepening her appreciation for the heritage that Veronica had so carelessly discarded. Her reputation had grown to the point where she was regularly featured in trade publications and invited to speak at international conferences. The articles she had written about identifying authentic Taiwanese jewelry from the mid-20th century had become standard references in the field, cited by other experts and used in university courses on Asian decorative arts. Her professional identity had evolved from that of a struggling graphic designer to a recognized authority whose expertise was valued by institutions and collectors worldwide. The success had enabled her to move from her modest Castro apartment to a spacious loft in the Mission District, where she had created both living space and a professional studio equipped with the latest authentication technology. The loft's exposed brick walls displayed carefully curated examples of Asian jewelry and decorative arts, creating an environment that was both home and showcase for her expertise. Marcus had helped design the space, understanding intuitively how to balance functionality with aesthetic appeal. Their relationship had deepened considerably during this period of professional growth and family turbulence. Marcus had proven to be not just a supportive partner, but an intellectual companion who understood the cultural and historical dimensions of her work. His background in photography had given him an appreciation for craftsmanship and attention to detail that complemented her expertise, and they often collaborated on documentation projects for her authentication work. The financial success of her business had created possibilities that Sophia had never imagined during her years of struggling to establish herself professionally. She had been able to purchase a small house in Berkeley as an investment property, and she had started a scholarship fund for students studying jewelry design and Asian art history. The fund was established in Popo's memory, ensuring that her grandmother's legacy would support future generations of artists and scholars. More significantly, the financial stability had given Sophia the freedom to be selective about her clients and projects, allowing her to focus on work that was personally meaningful rather than simply financially necessary. She had begun accepting only projects that involved significant cultural or historical importance, turning down routine appraisal work in favor of research and authentication that contributed to broader understanding of Asian decorative arts. Her relationship with her parents during this period had been complex and evolving. Linda and David had gradually begun to understand the magnitude of their daughter's professional achievement, but they struggled to reconcile their pride in her success with their discomfort about the ongoing estrangement between their daughters. They had made several attempts to broker communication between Sophia and Veronica, each effort revealing their fundamental misunderstanding of the issues involved. Linda had been particularly persistent in her efforts to restore family harmony, approaching the situation with the same determined optimism she had always applied to family problems. She had suggested family therapy, mediated conversations, and various compromise solutions that would allow both daughters to move forward without fully addressing the underlying issues. Her proposals invariably focused on finding middle ground rather than acknowledging that one sister had seriously wronged the other. David's approach had been more direct, but equally problematic.
He had suggested that Sophia should accept Veronica's financial offer and consider the matter resolved, arguing that holding on to resentment was ultimately self-destructive. His business background had made him focus on practical solutions rather than emotional healing, and he seemed genuinely puzzled by Sophia's refusal to accept what he viewed as generous compensation for past wrongs. Both parents had struggled to understand why their successful, financially stable daughter could not simply forgive and move on from what they continued to characterize as a mistake rather than a betrayal. Their inability to grasp the deeper issues of trust and respect had actually reinforced Sophia's conviction that her approach to the situation was correct, even if it meant prolonged family tension. The most painful aspect of this period had been watching her parents gradually align themselves with Veronica's version of events. Without fully understanding the professional expertise Sophia had developed or the true significance of Popo's collection, they had found it easier to accept Veronica's narrative of well-intentioned mistake followed by generous attempts at restitution. Sophia's refusal to accept these gestures had begun to seem unreasonable to them, particularly as time passed and family gatherings remained strained. Christmas that year had been particularly difficult, with Sophia choosing to spend the holiday with Marcus's family, rather than subjecting herself to the inevitable tension and pressure to reconcile with Veronica. The decision had hurt her parents deeply, but she had felt unable to participate in family celebrations that would require her to pretend that nothing significant had happened or that superficial politeness was an adequate substitute for genuine resolution. Marcus's family had welcomed her warmly, providing a glimpse of what healthy family dynamics could look like. His parents had asked thoughtful questions about her work and had shown genuine interest in her expertise without trying to minimize or redirect her professional achievements. The contrast with her own family's responses had been both comforting and heartbreaking, highlighting how much emotional energy she had been expending on relationships that consistently left her feeling diminished rather than supported. The new year had brought unexpected developments in her professional life that would ultimately impact the family situation in ways she could not have anticipated. Dr. Elizabeth Wong had contacted her about a major research project funded by a prestigious foundation, investigating the dispersal of cultural artifacts during periods of political upheaval in Asia. The project required expertise in authentication and cultural context that made Sophia an ideal collaborator. The research had involved traveling to museums and private collections across the United States, documenting pieces that had been separated from their original cultural contexts, and examining the circumstances of their acquisition. Much of the work had focused on jewelry and decorative arts that had been brought to America by immigrants fleeing political instability, pieces that often carried profound personal and cultural significance beyond their monetary value. Working on the project had deepened Sophia's understanding of the broader issues surrounding cultural heritage and family legacy. She had interviewed dozens of families whose precious possessions had been lost, stolen, or sold during periods of crisis, and she had heard countless stories of the lasting impact such losses had on subsequent generations. The parallels to her own experience with Popo's collection had been striking and had reinforced her conviction that protecting cultural heritage was about far more than preserving valuable objects. The project had also connected her with an international network of scholars, museum professionals, and legal experts who specialized in cultural property issues. Through these connections, she had learned about recent legal developments regarding the recovery of stolen cultural artifacts and had gained access to resources that could assist families in reclaiming lost heritage items. One of the most significant aspects of the research had been documenting the long-term psychological and cultural impact of heritage loss on families and communities. The studies had shown clearly that the theft or loss of culturally significant objects often created trauma that persisted across generations, affecting family identity and cultural continuity in ways that could not be remedied through financial compensation alone. The findings had been published in several academic journals and had contributed to important policy discussions about cultural property protection and restitution. Sophia's work on the project had established her as an expert not only in authentication, but also in the broader cultural and legal issues surrounding heritage preservation. The recognition had led to consulting opportunities with government agencies and international organizations working on cultural property issues. During the course of this research, Sophia had been contacted by an attorney specializing in cultural property law who had read her publications and was interested in discussing a potential collaboration. Attorney Sarah Kim had been working on several high-profile cases involving the recovery of Asian cultural artifacts, and she had been impressed by Sophia's combination of technical expertise and cultural sensitivity. Their initial meeting had been intended as a general discussion about potential collaboration, but it had evolved into something more significant when Sophia had mentioned her own experience with family jewelry theft and recovery. Sarah had been fascinated by the case, both for its legal implications and as an example of the type of heritage loss that her practice frequently encountered. Sarah had explained that cases like Sophia's were becoming increasingly common as awareness grew about the value of Asian cultural artifacts and as families gained access to authentication expertise that could establish the true significance of inherited pieces. She had also noted that the legal landscape regarding cultural property was evolving rapidly, with new protections being established for families seeking to recover stolen heritage items. The conversation had planted a seed of an idea that would gradually grow into a major expansion of Sophia's professional activities. Sarah had suggested that Sophia's unique combination of authentication expertise and personal experience with heritage recovery made her an ideal advocate for other families facing similar situations. The work would involve not only technical analysis, but also cultural education and legal support for families navigating complex recovery processes. The possibility of turning her personal experience into a tool for helping others had been immediately appealing to Sophia. She had recognized that her journey from victim of theft to successful recovery represented a model that could be adapted to assist other families, particularly those from immigrant communities who might lack the resources or knowledge to pursue heritage recovery on their own. Working with Sarah, Sophia had begun developing a consulting practice that specialized in heritage recovery for Asian immigrant families. The work combined authentication services with legal support and cultural advocacy, providing comprehensive assistance for families seeking to reclaim stolen or lost cultural artifacts. The practice had been structured as a non-profit organization, ensuring that families with limited financial resources could access the services regardless of their ability to pay. The Heritage Recovery Project, as they had named their collaboration, had quickly gained attention within both the legal and cultural preservation communities. They have been invited to present their model at conferences and had received inquiries from families across the country who had heard about their work through community networks and cultural organizations. One of their first major cases involved a family whose grandmother's jade collection had been stolen during a home invasion in Oakland. The pieces had eventually surfaced at an auction house in Los Angeles, but the family had lacked the expertise and resources to prove ownership and pursue recovery. Sophia's authentication work had established the provenance of the pieces, while Sarah's legal advocacy had resulted in their successful return to the family. The case had been covered extensively in local media, highlighting both the vulnerability of immigrant families to heritage theft and the possibility of successful recovery with appropriate support.
The coverage had led to additional case referrals and had raised awareness about the broader issues surrounding cultural property protection in immigrant communities. As the Heritage Recovery Project had grown, Sophia had found herself in the unexpected position of being recognized as a leader in cultural advocacy as well as authentication. She had been invited to testify before legislative committees considering cultural property protection laws, and she had become a regular speaker at community organizations working on immigrant rights and cultural preservation issues. The transformation from someone who had been victimized by heritage theft to someone who was helping others recover their own stolen cultural property had been both personally healing and professionally fulfilling. The work had given deeper meaning to her own recovery of Popo's collection, demonstrating that her experience could serve a purpose beyond personal satisfaction. However, the success and recognition had also created new complications in her relationship with her family. As Sophia's work gained media attention and professional acclaim, it had become impossible for her parents to remain unaware of the magnitude of her achievements.
The local newspaper had run a feature story about the Heritage Recovery Project, and several television interviews had brought her work to broader public attention. Linda and David had been proud of their daughter's professional success, but they had also been uncomfortable with the implicit criticism of their own response to the jewelry theft. The media coverage had inevitably included details about Sophia's personal experience with heritage loss, and the contrast between her sister's actions and her own subsequent achievements had been stark and unflattering to the family. Veronica's reaction to the media attention had been particularly complex. On one hand, she had been forced to confront the reality that her casual dismissal of Popo's jewelry had contributed to a chain of events that had ultimately led to her sister's professional transformation and public recognition. On the other hand, the coverage had portrayed her as the antagonist in a story of cultural heritage preservation, a role that had been deeply uncomfortable for someone who prided herself on her progressive values and cultural sensitivity. The tension had come to a head when a journalist working on a follow-up story about heritage recovery had contacted Veronica directly, seeking her perspective on her sister's work and their family's experience with cultural property theft. Veronica had declined to be interviewed, but the journalist's questions had apparently forced her to confront aspects of the situation that she had previously managed to avoid acknowledging. The call from Veronica that had followed the journalist's inquiry had been unlike any conversation the sisters had ever had. Rather than her usual confident tone and strategic approach to family management, Veronica had sounded genuinely shaken and uncertain. She had asked Sophia whether they could meet in person to discuss the situation, acknowledging that her previous attempts at resolution had been inadequate and misguided. Their meeting had taken place at a quiet cafe in the Mission District, neutral territory where both sisters could speak freely without the weight of family history and parental expectations. Veronica had arrived early and had been waiting nervously when Sophia had entered, her usual polished appearance slightly disheveled and her confident demeanor notably absent. The conversation had begun with Veronica acknowledging that she had finally begun to understand the true scope of what she had done and its lasting impact on both Sophia and their family. She had explained that reading about her sister's work in cultural heritage recovery had forced her to confront the reality that her actions had been part of a broader pattern of cultural dismissal and family disrespect that she had never previously recognized. For the first time, Veronica had spoken about her own relationship with their family's cultural heritage and her struggles with identity as a second-generation immigrant. She had admitted that Popo's stories and cultural emphasis had always made her uncomfortable, representing expectations and traditions that had felt incompatible with her desire to fully assimilate into American culture. The jewelry collection, she had acknowledged, had represented everything she had been trying to distance herself from: old-world values, cultural obligations, and family expectations that had felt limiting rather than enriching. Her decision to sell the pieces had been motivated not just by casual disregard for their value, but by a deeper rejection of what they represented in her own identity struggle. The admission had been both revelatory and painful for both sisters. Sophia had finally understood that Veronica's actions had been driven by internal conflicts about cultural identity rather than simple callousness or greed. However, the explanation had also highlighted how profoundly different their relationships with their heritage had been and how little they had understood each other despite growing up in the same household. Veronica had gone on to explain that witnessing Sophia's professional success and public recognition forced her to reconsider her own relationship with their cultural background. She had begun to understand that rejecting cultural heritage did not necessarily lead to greater freedom or success, and that Sophia's embrace of their family traditions had actually been a source of strength and professional opportunity. The conversation had lasted for several hours, with both sisters exploring aspects of their relationship and family dynamics that had never been openly discussed. For the first time, they had been able to talk honestly about their different responses to growing up as Asian Americans, their relationships with their parents' expectations, and their individual struggles with identity and belonging. Sophia had shared her own journey of discovering that cultural heritage could be a source of empowerment rather than limitation, and how her work with Popo's collection had ultimately led to professional success and personal fulfillment. She had explained that recovering the jewelry had been important not just for its monetary value or sentimental significance, but because it had represented reclaiming a part of herself that she had allowed others to diminish or dismiss. Veronica had listened with an attention and respect that had been absent from their previous interactions, asking thoughtful questions and acknowledging aspects of Sophia's experience that she had never previously considered. The conversation had not resulted in immediate forgiveness or complete reconciliation, but it had established a foundation of mutual understanding that had been missing from their relationship for years. By the end of their meeting, both sisters had recognized that rebuilding their relationship would require ongoing effort and patience rather than dramatic gestures. Veronica had committed to continuing therapy to work on her own issues with cultural identity and family relationships, while Sophia had agreed to remain open to gradual rebuilding of trust and communication. The months following this conversation had been marked by small but significant changes in their family dynamics. Veronica had begun making genuine efforts to understand and appreciate their cultural heritage, asking Sophia about her work and expressing interest in learning more about the historical and cultural significance of Asian decorative arts. She had also started making amends in practical ways, volunteering with the Heritage Recovery Project and using her marketing skills to help promote awareness about cultural property theft and recovery. The work had given her first-hand exposure to other families' experiences with heritage loss, deepening her understanding of the broader implications of what she had done to her own family. Linda and David had been relieved to see their daughters communicating again, though they had been careful not to pressure either sister to move faster than felt comfortable. They had also begun making their own efforts to better understand and support Sophia's work, attending her speaking engagements and contributing financially to the Heritage Recovery Project. The family's Chinese New Year celebration that year was the first time in several years that all 4 family members had gathered comfortably together. The occasion had been marked by Sophia wearing several pieces from Popo's recovered collection, including the jade bracelet that had become her signature piece. The jewelry had sparked conversations about family history and cultural traditions that had been absent from their gatherings for too long.
Veronica had brought a gift for Sophia, a carefully researched book about traditional Taiwanese jewelry techniques, along with a handwritten note acknowledging the significance of Popo's collection and expressing gratitude for Sophia's patience during her process of understanding and growth. The gesture had been modest but meaningful, representing genuine effort to understand and honor what had been lost and recovered. As Sophia had looked around the dinner table that evening, watching her family engage in conversations about culture, heritage, and family history, she had reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them to this point. The theft of Popo's jewelry had been devastating, but it had also catalyzed a process of growth and discovery that had ultimately strengthened both her professional life and her family relationships. The jade bracelet on her wrist had caught the light from the dining room chandelier, reminding her of the stories Popo had told about resilience, adaptation, and the importance of preserving what matters most while remaining open to change and growth. The piece that had once represented loss and betrayal had become a symbol of recovery, empowerment, and the possibility of healing even the most damaged relationships. Marcus had joined them for dinner, and Sophia had watched him engage easily with her family, sharing stories about their work together and asking thoughtful questions about their parents' own immigration experiences. The contrast with previous family gatherings, when conversation had been strained and superficial, had been remarkable and encouraging. Later that evening, as they had been cleaning up after dinner, Veronica had approached Sophia privately to share something she had been working on. She had been researching their family genealogy and had discovered information about Popo's family background in Taiwan that none of them had known. The research had revealed that their grandmother's family had been involved in traditional jewelry making, which helped explain both the quality of her collection and her deep appreciation for fine craftsmanship. The discovery had provided new context for Popo's stories and had highlighted the cultural knowledge that had been passed down through the jewelry collection. Veronica had suggested that they might work together to document this family history and create a permanent record of Popo's stories and their cultural significance. The proposal had represented a genuine effort to contribute positively to preserving their family heritage rather than dismissing or diminishing it. As Sophia had considered her sister's proposal, she had recognized how much their relationship had evolved from the dark period following the jewelry theft. While complete trust would take time to rebuild, the foundation for genuine reconciliation had been established through honest communication, mutual effort, and shared commitment to honoring their family heritage. The Heritage Recovery Project had continued to grow, attracting national attention and inspiring similar initiatives in other communities.
Sophia's work had been featured in documentary films and academic studies, establishing her as a leading voice in cultural heritage preservation and immigrant rights advocacy. The professional recognition had been gratifying, but the most meaningful aspect of the work had been helping other families recover pieces of their own cultural identity and family history. Each successful recovery case had reinforced the lessons from her own experience, that cultural heritage could not be reduced to monetary value, that family relationships required ongoing effort and mutual respect to remain healthy, and that apparent setbacks could sometimes lead to unexpected opportunities for growth and empowerment. The skills and insights she had developed through her own painful experience had become tools for helping others navigate similar challenges. The relationship with Marcus had also continued to deepen, with both of them recognizing that they wanted to build a life together that honored both their individual achievements and their shared values around family, culture, and social responsibility. They had begun discussing marriage and had started looking at houses in neighborhoods that would accommodate both their professional needs and their desire to remain connected to the diverse communities that had shaped their work. The financial success of Sophia's various professional activities had created possibilities for the future that extended far beyond personal security. She had been able to establish an endowment fund for the Heritage Recovery Project, ensuring that the work could continue and expand regardless of her personal involvement. She had also begun planning for a research center that would focus on cultural heritage preservation and would provide resources for families, scholars, and legal professionals working on cultural property issues. As she looked toward the future, Sophia felt a sense of purpose and direction that had been missing during her years of struggling to establish herself professionally and personally. The journey from victim of heritage theft to leader in heritage recovery had been painful and challenging, but it had ultimately led to a life that felt both personally fulfilling and socially meaningful. The transformation had been possible only because she had refused to accept easy solutions or superficial reconciliation, instead insisting on genuine understanding and authentic relationship building. The patience and persistence required for this approach had been difficult, but the results had validated her belief that real healing requires addressing root causes, rather than simply managing symptoms. Popo's jewelry collection, safely secured in her loft and regularly worn as both personal adornment and professional symbol, served as a daily reminder of the journey that had brought her to this point. Each piece carried not only Popo's original stories, but also new layers of meaning related to recovery, resilience, and the power of refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. The sister who had given away her gift had unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that had led to achievements and recognition far beyond what anyone in their family could have imagined. The betrayal that had seemed so devastating at the time had become the catalyst for a transformation that had ultimately benefited not only Sophia, but also countless other families struggling with similar heritage loss and recovery challenges. As Sophia prepared for whatever new developments lay ahead, she carried with her the knowledge that she had built something meaningful from loss, that she had the strength to overcome betrayal and build authentic relationships, and that her grandmother's legacy lived on not only in the recovered jewelry, but also in the work she had built to honor and protect cultural heritage for future generations. The next phase of the story was still unfolding, but Sophia faced it with confidence born from experience, expertise developed through dedicated effort, and relationships rebuilt on foundations of honesty and mutual respect. The woman who had once been devastated by her sister's casual dismissal of family heritage had become someone whose voice carried weight in discussions about cultural preservation and whose work made tangible differences in families' ability to maintain connections to their cultural identity and family history. The call that would change everything came on a crisp October morning when Sophia was reviewing authentication reports in her loft office. The caller identified herself as Janet Morrison, a producer for a national television program that focused on remarkable personal transformations and community impact stories. Janet explained that she had been following Sophia's work with the Heritage Recovery Project and was interested in featuring her story as part of a series about individuals who had turned personal adversity into social good. Initially, Sophia had been hesitant about the level of exposure that national television would bring. Her work had already attracted significant attention within professional circles and immigrant communities, but appearing on mainstream television would bring her story to a much broader audience. The potential benefits for the Heritage Recovery Project were obvious, but she was also concerned about the impact on her family relationships, which had only recently begun to stabilize. Marcus had encouraged her to consider the opportunity, pointing out that her story could inspire other families dealing with heritage loss and could bring national attention to issues that affect immigrant communities across the country. Dr. Wang had also been enthusiastic about the possibility, noting that increased visibility could lead to additional funding and institutional support for cultural preservation work. After several conversations with the production team and careful consideration of the potential consequences, Sophia had agreed to participate in the program. The filming process had been more intensive than she had anticipated, involving multiple interviews, documentation of her authentication work, and footage of her interactions with families served by the Heritage Recovery Project.
The producers had been particularly interested in the dramatic elements of her personal story, the betrayal by her sister, the years of professional development motivated by loss, and the ultimate recovery of Popo's collection through her own expertise. They had handled the family dynamics sensitively, focusing on themes of resilience and transformation rather than sensationalizing the conflict between the sisters. Veronica had been invited to participate in the program but had declined, explaining that she preferred to support Sophia's work from behind the scenes rather than becoming part of the public narrative. Her decision had been respected by both the production team and Sophia, who had appreciated her sister's recognition that this was Sophia's story to tell rather than an opportunity for shared spotlight. The program had aired on a Tuesday evening in November, reaching an audience of millions across the country. Sophia had watched it with Marcus and a small group of close friends, feeling surreal about seeing her life story presented as an inspirational narrative for national consumption. The production had been well-crafted and respectful, highlighting both the personal journey and the broader social impact of her work. The response to the broadcast had been overwhelming and immediate. The Heritage Recovery Project's website had crashed within hours due to the volume of traffic, and Sophia's professional email had been flooded with messages from families, journalists, and organizations interested in learning more about her work. The attention had been gratifying but also somewhat overwhelming for someone who had spent most of her career working behind the scenes. More significantly, the program had attracted the attention of several major foundations and cultural institutions that were interested in supporting heritage preservation work. Within weeks of the broadcast, Sophia had received inquiries about potential partnerships, funding opportunities, and invitations to expand the Heritage Recovery Project to serve additional communities and geographic regions. The most unexpected response had come from an attorney in Washington, D.C., who specialized in international cultural property law. Catherine Liu had contacted Sophia to discuss a potential collaboration on a case involving stolen Buddhist artifacts that had been trafficked from Tibet to private collectors in the United States. The case required someone with Sophia's combination of authentication expertise and cultural sensitivity, and it represented an opportunity to work on heritage recovery at an international level. The collaboration with Catherine had opened doors to a completely new dimension of Sophia's work. International cultural property cases were complex and high stakes, involving diplomatic considerations, international law, and cultural sensitivities that went far beyond the family-focused work she had been doing. However, the skills and perspectives she had developed through her personal experience and domestic heritage recovery work have proved surprisingly applicable to these larger cases. Working on international cultural property cases had also connected Sophia with a global network of scholars, legal experts, and cultural advocates who were working on similar issues around the world. She had been invited to participate in conferences in Europe and Asia, sharing her expertise and learning about heritage preservation challenges in different cultural contexts. The professional growth and recognition had been accompanied by personal developments that were equally significant. Marcus had proposed to her during a quiet weekend at their Berkeley house, presenting her with an engagement ring that incorporated a small piece of jade in a modern setting that honored both her cultural heritage and contemporary aesthetic preferences. The proposal had been perfect in its simplicity and thoughtfulness, reflecting their shared values and mutual understanding. Planning their wedding had provided an opportunity to celebrate both their relationship and the cultural traditions that had become increasingly important to Sophia. They had decided on a ceremony that would blend elements from both their backgrounds, creating a celebration that honored their family's heritage while reflecting their own values and personalities. Veronica had asked to be involved in the wedding planning, expressing a desire to contribute meaningfully to her sister's happiness and to demonstrate her ongoing commitment to rebuilding their relationship. Her involvement had been careful and respectful, focusing on ways she could support Sophia's vision rather than trying to impose her own preferences or ideas. The engagement had also prompted conversations with their parents about family traditions, cultural celebrations, and the ways that heritage could be preserved and adapted across generations. Linda and David had been enthusiastic about the wedding plans and had shared stories about their own wedding and early marriage that helped contextualize their daughter's experiences within broader family history. As the wedding date had approached, Sophia had made the decision to wear several pieces from Popo's recovered collection, including the jade bracelet that had become her signature piece and the drop earrings that Popo had worn to special occasions. The jewelry would serve both as personal adornment and as a symbol of continuity, connecting Popo's memory to this new chapter in Sophia's life. The wedding itself had been a beautiful celebration that brought together family, friends, and colleagues in recognition of both the marriage and the journey that had brought Sophia to this point. The ceremony had incorporated traditional Chinese elements alongside contemporary traditions, creating a meaningful blend that honored heritage while embracing the future. During the reception, Sophia had taken a moment to speak about the significance of family, heritage, and the importance of preserving what matters most while remaining open to growth and change. Her remarks had been brief but heartfelt, acknowledging the difficult journey that had brought their family to this point, while expressing gratitude for the relationships and opportunities that had emerged from that experience. Veronica had also spoken during the reception, offering a toast that acknowledged her sister's strength, wisdom, and generosity in allowing their relationship to heal and grow. Her words had been carefully chosen and genuinely felt, representing the culmination of years of effort to understand and atone for her past actions. The months following the wedding had been marked by continued expansion of Sophia's professional activities and deepening of her personal relationships. The Heritage Recovery Project had grown to include offices in 3 major cities, serving immigrant communities across the country and collaborating with international organizations on cross-border heritage recovery cases. Her expertise had become sought after not only for individual authentication and recovery cases, but also for policy development and legislative advocacy. She had been invited to testify before congressional committees considering cultural property protection laws, and her recommendations had been incorporated into several important pieces of legislation. The work had also evolved to include educational components, with Sophia developing programs for museums, universities, and community organizations that taught about cultural heritage preservation and the importance of protecting family and community artifacts. The educational work had been particularly rewarding, allowing her to share Popo's stories and lessons with new audiences while helping others understand the deeper significance of cultural preservation. Marcus had become increasingly involved in documenting the Heritage Recovery Project's work through photography and videography, creating visual records that captured both the technical aspects of authentication and the emotional impact of heritage recovery on families. His artistic background had brought a unique perspective to the documentation work, highlighting the human stories behind the legal and technical processes. Their collaborative work had strengthened their marriage and had created shared professional interests that complemented their personal relationship. They had developed a rhythm of working together that respected both their individual expertise and their partnership, creating something together that was greater than what either could have accomplished alone. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together.
The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together. The success of their professional collaboration also enabled them to purchase a larger home in Oakland that could accommodate both their growing business activities and their personal life together.
The house had become a gathering place for friends, colleagues, and family, hosting dinners and meetings that brought together diverse communities around shared interests in art, culture, and social justice. The relationship with her parents had continued to evolve in positive directions, with Linda and David becoming increasingly involved in supporting the Heritage Recovery Project through volunteer work and financial contributions. They had also begun exploring their own family history more deeply, inspired by Sophia's work and eager to better understand and preserve their own cultural heritage. David had surprised everyone by beginning to learn Mandarin, explaining that he wanted to be able to communicate more effectively with elderly clients of the Heritage Recovery Project who might be more comfortable speaking in their native language. His effort had been touching and had demonstrated a level of cultural engagement that had been absent during Sophia's childhood. Linda had become involved in organizing community events that celebrated Asian American heritage and raised awareness about cultural preservation issues. Her organizational skills and social connections had proved valuable for outreach and fundraising activities, and she had found purpose in contributing to work that honored both her family's heritage and her daughter's achievements. The transformation in her parents' attitudes and involvement had been one of the most gratifying aspects of Sophia's success. Watching them embrace cultural preservation work and develop genuine appreciation for heritage issues had validated her own journey and had helped heal some of the cultural disconnection that had characterized her childhood. Veronica's evolution had been equally remarkable, though more gradual and sometimes difficult to observe. She had continued therapy to work on identity issues and family relationships, and she had become increasingly involved in community volunteer work that reflected her growing understanding of cultural preservation and social justice issues. Her marketing expertise had been valuable for promoting the Heritage Recovery Project's work and reaching new audiences, and she had used her professional skills to support various cultural organizations and immigrant rights groups. The work had given her a way to contribute positively to communities that had been affected by the same types of heritage loss that she had unknowingly perpetrated against her own family. More personally, Veronica had begun exploring her own relationship with Chinese culture and family heritage, taking cooking classes, studying language, and asking family members about traditions and stories that she had previously dismissed or ignored. Her efforts had been genuine, if sometimes awkward, representing a fundamental shift in her understanding of identity and belonging. The sisters' relationship had stabilized into something that was both different from their childhood dynamic and healthier than their previous interactions. They had developed mutual respect based on understanding each other's perspectives and strengths, and they had found ways to support each other's growth and happiness without falling back into old patterns of competition or comparison. Their conversations had become more substantive and meaningful, focusing on shared interests and values rather than superficial updates or family politics. They had begun collaborating on projects related to documenting their family history and preserving Popo stories for future generations, work that had brought them closer together while honoring their grandmother's memory. The success of the Heritage Recovery Project had enabled Sophia to establish several related initiatives that addressed broader issues affecting immigrant communities.
She had launched a legal clinic that provided free services for families dealing with cultural property disputes, and she had created educational programs that taught young people about the importance of heritage preservation and cultural identity. The legal clinic had been particularly successful, serving hundreds of families and recovering cultural artifacts worth millions of dollars. The work had attracted attention from law schools and legal organizations, leading to partnerships that provided student volunteers and ongoing support for the clinic's activities. The educational programs had been implemented in schools and community centers across the country, reaching thousands of young people with messages about cultural pride, heritage preservation, and the importance of understanding family history. The programs had been especially popular in communities with large immigrant populations, where young people often struggled with questions of identity and belonging. As Sophia had reflected on the journey from the devastating loss of Popo's jewelry to the creation of a national organization dedicated to heritage recovery, she had been struck by the unexpected ways that personal pain could be transformed into social good. The betrayal that had seemed so destructive at the time had ultimately catalyzed developments that had benefited countless families and had contributed to important policy changes at the national level. The transformation had not been easy or immediate, requiring years of education, professional development, and personal growth. However, the foundation of resilience and determination that Popo had instilled through her stories and example had provided the strength necessary to persevere through difficult periods and to maintain focus on long-term goals rather than immediate gratification. The financial success that had accompanied professional recognition had enabled Sophia to establish an endowment that would ensure the Heritage Recovery Project's long-term sustainability. The endowment had been structured to provide ongoing support for heritage recovery services while also funding research and advocacy work that could prevent future cultural property theft and improve legal protections for immigrant families. Looking toward the future, Sophia had begun planning for new initiatives that would expand heritage preservation work into additional areas and communities. She had been invited to establish an international fellowship program that would bring scholars and advocates from around the world to study heritage recovery methods and adapt them for use in their own countries. The fellowship program represented an opportunity to share the lessons learned from her personal experience and the Heritage Recovery Project's work with a global audience, potentially influencing heritage preservation efforts in dozens of countries. The prospect of seeing her grandmother's stories and values contribute to cultural preservation work around the world had been deeply meaningful and had provided a sense of purpose that extended far beyond personal or professional achievement. Marcus had been increasingly involved in planning for these future initiatives, using his artistic skills to develop visual materials and documentation that could support international heritage preservation work. Their collaboration had evolved beyond their original shared interests to encompass a comprehensive vision for cultural preservation and social justice that incorporated both their professional expertise and personal values. The house in Oakland had become a hub for planning and coordination activities, hosting meetings with international visitors, policy discussions, and community events that brought together diverse stakeholders around shared interests in heritage preservation. The space had been designed to accommodate both professional activities and family life, reflecting their intention to build a life that integrated meaningful work with personal happiness and community engagement. As their first wedding anniversary had approached, Sophia and Marcus had begun discussing plans for starting a family of their own. The prospect of raising children who would grow up understanding the importance of cultural heritage and social responsibility had been exciting and prompted conversations about the values and traditions they wanted to pass on to the next generation. The decision to start a family had also prompted reflection on the lessons learned from her own childhood. Sophia had been determined to create an environment where children would feel valued for their authentic selves, rather than measured against external expectations, and where cultural heritage would be celebrated as a source of strength rather than burden. The relationships with extended family had also continued to develop in positive directions, with cousins, aunts, and uncles becoming more involved in heritage preservation activities and family history documentation. The work had created new connections within the family and had strengthened bonds that had been weakened by geographic distance and cultural assimilation pressures. The annual family gatherings had been transformed from occasions marked by tension and superficial conversation to celebrations that incorporated meaningful discussions about heritage, identity, and family values. The changes had been gradual but significant, reflecting the broader transformation in family dynamics that had emerged from the crisis surrounding Popo's jewelry. As Sophia had prepared for a major international conference where she would present research on heritage recovery methods to delegates from 40 countries, she had reflected on how different her life had become from what anyone could have predicted during the dark period following the jewelry theft.
The woman who had once been devastated by her sister's betrayal had become a leader whose work influenced policy discussions and cultural preservation efforts around the world. The jade bracelet that she wore to professional events had become a symbol not only of personal recovery, but also of the broader possibilities for transformation and healing that could emerge from even the most painful experiences. The piece that had once represented loss and betrayal had evolved into a reminder of resilience, professional achievement, and the importance of refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. The conference presentation had been well received and had led to invitations for additional speaking engagements and collaboration opportunities. The international exposure had raised the profile of the Heritage Recovery Project and had created possibilities for expansion into new regions and communities that could benefit from heritage preservation services. Following the conference, Sophia had been approached by publishers interested in her writing a book about her experiences and the lessons learned from heritage recovery work. The prospect of sharing her story and insights with an even broader audience had been appealing, particularly as a way to educate people about cultural preservation issues and inspire others who might be dealing with similar challenges. The book project had become a family collaboration, with Veronica contributing research assistance and Marcus providing photography that would illustrate both the technical aspects of heritage recovery and the emotional impact on families. The collaborative approach had felt appropriate, given how much their relationships had evolved and how important family support had been to her success. Writing the book had also provided an opportunity to document Popo's stories and wisdom in a permanent form that could be shared with future generations. The stories that had once seemed like simple family anecdotes had taken on new significance as examples of resilience, cultural preservation, and the importance of maintaining connections to heritage even during periods of change and uncertainty. As Sophia had worked on the book manuscript, she had been struck by how many of the lessons that Popo had tried to teach through her stories had proven relevant to the challenges and opportunities that had defined her adult life. The emphasis on patience, perseverance, and the importance of understanding true value rather than being deceived by superficial appearances had guided her through both personal crises and professional decisions. The book had been completed during the spring following the international conference, and early reviews had been positive, with critics noting both the personal narrative's compelling arc and the broader social significance of heritage preservation work. The publication had been scheduled for release during Asian American Heritage Month, providing an opportunity to connect the personal story with broader community celebrations and educational activities. The success of the book had led to additional media appearances and speaking opportunities, further raising awareness about heritage preservation issues and the Heritage Recovery Project's work. The increased visibility had also generated additional funding and support for expanding services to underserved communities and developing new programs focused on heritage education and cultural advocacy. As Sophia had celebrated her second wedding anniversary with Marcus, surrounded by family and friends who had supported their journey together, she had reflected on how much had changed since that devastating morning when she had watched Veronica sell Popo's jewelry to a stranger. The betrayal that had seemed to destroy her connection to family heritage had ultimately led to a life dedicated to preserving and protecting cultural legacy for others. The evening had been marked by toasts and speeches that celebrated both their marriage and the broader community that had developed around their shared work and values. Veronica's toast had been particularly moving, acknowledging her sister's grace in allowing their relationship to heal and expressing gratitude for the opportunity to contribute to meaningful work that honored their family's heritage and values.
Their parents had also spoken, sharing their pride in both daughters' achievements and their gratitude for the family healing that had emerged from what had initially seemed like an irreparable crisis. Their words had reflected genuine understanding of the work their daughters were doing and appreciation for the cultural preservation and social justice values that had become central to their family identity. The celebration had concluded with Sophia wearing Popo's complete jewelry collection for the first time since its recovery, each piece carefully chosen and arranged to honor both the traditional craftsmanship and the contemporary significance of the collection. The sight of all the pieces together had been breathtaking and had prompted stories and memories that connected Popo's original narratives with the new chapters that had been written through recovery and preservation work. Looking toward the future, Sophia had felt confident that the foundation she had built would continue to grow and evolve, serving families and communities while honoring the memory and values of the grandmother who had inspired the entire journey. The Heritage Recovery Project had become more than a professional achievement. It had evolved into a living legacy that will continue to impact lives and preserve cultural heritage for generations to come. The woman who had once sat in devastation, watching her inheritance disappear into a stranger's car, had become someone whose voice carried weight in international discussions about cultural preservation, whose work had changed laws and policies, and whose story inspired others to transform personal adversity into social good. The journey had been long and sometimes difficult, but it had ultimately led to a life that honored both personal values and community needs, while creating lasting positive change in the world. As Sophia prepared for the next phase of expansion for the Heritage Recovery Project, including the opening of an international office and the launch of a fellowship program for emerging heritage preservation advocates, she carried with her the knowledge that she had built something meaningful from loss, that she had the strength to overcome betrayal and create authentic relationships, and that her grandmother's legacy lived on, not only in the recovered jewelry, but also in the work that continues to protect and preserve cultural heritage for families around the world. The sister who had given away her gift unknowingly set in motion a transformation that had ultimately benefited thousands of families and had contributed to important changes in how society understood and protected cultural heritage. The betrayal that had seemed so devastating had become the catalyst for achievements and impact that extended far beyond what anyone could have imagined, proving that even the most painful experiences could be transformed into sources of strength, purpose, and positive change. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.